This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Some of us in this field, we tend to doubt our enoughness. And I talk about this in the book, and I talk about this in workshops sometimes, because people really doubt that. Am I trained enough? Am I ready enough? Am I healed enough? Am I strong enough? And we doubt that. And in my own mind, what I've had to do is rework that so that it's evidence that my work matters very deeply to me. That is a sign of my reverence for what I'm doing.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. My guest today is community doula and death literacy advocate, author Francesca Arnoldy. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast is sponsored by the Tree of Life Conference by International Doula Life Movement. Join IDLM at the Tree of Life Conference in San Antonio, Texas, November 1st through the 4th. The Tree of Life Conference is more than just workshops and seminars. It's an opportunity to connect, learn, and renew your commitment to compassionate care. Attendees will hear from expert speakers like end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes and Death Deck co-creator Lisa Paul. Visit internationaldoulalifemovement.com for more details. This episode of The Heart of Hospice is sponsored by Odonata Care. When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
Francesca Arnoldy is my guest today. She is a death literacy advocate. She's a community doula and the author of several books. She's the author of Cultivating the Doula Heart, which is a guidebook. She's the author of a picture book called Map of Memory Lane. And then she's also got a new workbook called The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. She's a researcher with the Vermont Conversation Lab, and she was the original course developer of the University of Vermont's End-of-Life Doula Professional Certificate Program. Francesca regularly presents and teaches on life and death topics with the hope of encouraging people to support one another through times of intensity. And that's what our conversation is about today. You're really going to enjoy it. We're going to dive deep into doula work and what it means to be a companion at the end of life for someone else. She sees the role of an end-of-life doula as that extra layer of support for the patient and family, coming in and stepping in where a hospice team doesn't have the time or the space to step in. She's also been working on her own death journal for many years. I love this part. We could have talked more about that. I really enjoyed listening to this. Her death journal is a compilation of information that her family can use to remember who she is, understand her wishes and values for her end of life. She said she has a section that's entitled Happiness Is, and then Comfort Is. And then she updates those and adds in. I think that's such a wonderful way to communicate who you are, what your values are, what means quality to you in such a very personal and and individualized way. We talked about the appropriateness of having children attend funerals and other death rituals and the benefits of exposing them to those life experiences, what they can learn from us. Francesca also shares her definition of the role of a doula and how she tries to stay flexible in that role, meeting people where they are, being open-minded, and still being mindful of who she is and the role she's playing in what's happening. She's very thoughtful in the way she considers the differences between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, and how those emotions influence her work as a doula and her role as a doula. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with death doula Francesca Arnoldy. Francesca, it's so great to talk with you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We have been talking about kids and family and work and just getting to know each other so my listeners can get to know you a little bit. I have a question for you, a little icebreaker question. If you could have any animal as a pet, what would you choose?
Wow. I didn't really have a lot of pets growing up. I had a hamster, which I would not redo. That was weird. I liked it as a kid, but not as an adult. And my husband came with a dog, and I feel like that's been really lovely. We do have a cat. Cats are different. I don't quite speak cat, although I have bonded with ours. She's a pandemic pet. I feel good on the amount of animals I have in my life. So I don't think I would add in another. I think that if I were to connect with an animal again, it might be a horse. I rode horses with my family when I was growing up, and I haven't done that in a long, long time. So I would not want to have one and caretake for one, but I would love to be able to get back on a horse and go for a ride. That seems fun.
I like that idea, but having it as a pet, like
No,
you
that's a lot of
weren't
work.
one of those horse crazy little
No.
girls that wanted, a pony in the backyard,
Mm-mm.
that kind of thing.
Nope. No, we had horses that my grandparents mostly took care of, and we got to go on trail rides, and I did some gymkhana events, like some kind of barrel racing and other three-legged races with my cousin and a horse, and just fun kid stuff. But that's where it ended, and I'm okay with that. But I do feel like horses they can be so attuned to us in this pretty magical way.
I totally get that. I have a golden doodle who is a registered therapy animal with me, a team with me. And while he was growing up, we've had him almost 4 years. While he was growing up, he was, during the pandemic, a therapy animal for me before we did the evaluation. I think animals have a lot of therapeutic value for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our dog is right up in our faces if we are ever upset or ill, coughing, sneezing, crying. He's right up there checking on us.
Does your cat do that? Because I don't think cats have that kind of vibe. Not in my experience, anyway.
Yeah, I don't think cats are going to do anything that doesn't serve them specifically. So it's so much on their terms. If it works for them, if they might get a treat out of it, then sure. But otherwise, probably not.
No, they're all about themselves.
Yeah, they are.
You can tell I'm not a cat person.
I'm slowly a cat person for this particular one cat in my life.
That's personal growth. You're making allowances.
I am.
That's good. That's good. You're
Bumping out
a
my
better
edges.
person than I am. Yes.
It's a journey.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have you on the show, and we are diving into all things doula today.
Wonderful.
Which is a growing conversation across the U.S., a growing conversation among end-of-life workers and hospice professionals, because doulas and recognition of the value of doulas is becoming a much broader focus, a bigger focus than it used to be. So when you think of your role as a community doula and a death literacy advocate, how would you define the death doula role, the end-of-life doula role?
In short, I would say I'm a non-medical emotional support person who complements the care that's already available to somebody, whether it's hospice care or palliative care or somebody's family doctor, and also the layers of natural nurturers around them. It could be neighbors, loved ones. So I add in an additional layer as I'm assessing what is already established and what might be beneficial in addition to that. My focus tends to be on planning, preparing, and processing, which for me is quite similar to the work that I had done as a birth doula. And I've been a postpartum doula, a childbirth educator, and a labor and birth doula for quite a span of time. And in supporting people with their preparations for their impending birth, it feels pretty similar actually to the end of life. It's a lot of reflecting back, and it's establishing rapport and trust between the two of us. It's being a listener. It's catching a lot of stories. It's being available when people are ready to process their fears and anxieties and their hopes. And then ideally being able to document some of that so that we as a care team, myself included, will be able to address any needs that are arising in the moment leading up to the birth, during the birth or after, or for end of life, leading up to the person's dying journey, through that journey or afterward, so that we can really personalize and customize the kind of care that we are supplying to them.
So you used a phrase that I think is really interesting. Natural nurturers. It's hard to say. Natural nurturers. Not everybody has that gift naturally. And I think that's where a doula comes in so, I don't even want to say handy because I don't think that hits it hard enough. A doula can be so essential at a time like that. We do a lot of birth planning, right? We have all those appointments. We have all those books that we talk about it. But if death is a similar process, why don't we have all those planning conversations? Why don't we have a death plan like we have a birth plan?
Exactly. And we are. It's happening. It's starting to happen. And there's definitely more of a movement. And I'm noticing more of an openness with people. I think that, of course, I recognize that birth is very celebratory and we're adding a person into our family and our life. So we're much more able to lean into that experience, while death is losing somebody from life. And for the person who is terminally ill, there's so much mystery. There are so many emotions that are involved during that phase that I completely recognize and respect. And also, I've seen great benefit of having those conversations, of exploring and discovering our own wishes and preferences, and then being able to create something like end-of-life care wishes, which is a top priority of mine as a doula and as a human, as a mom, as a wife, as a loved one of other people, because then it frees you up to live more fully and enjoy the time that you do have and the opportunities that you are granted in the time that you have left. So I think that it's gradual. We're easing our way into it. That's why I talk about death literacy. And for me, that's re-engaging with the conversations around mortality. And it's re-embracing that I am, in fact, mortal, that my time here is limited. And so how can I best prepare for that for myself and for others? And how can I best live the life that I have available to me?
Yeah, it's about quality of life. So maybe that's what we ought to call it. Instead of end-of-life planning, maybe we should call it quality of life planning.
Oh, I like that.
I don't know. Sometimes I think reframing with words is very powerful. And maybe that's a little more palatable.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of the work that you do as a doula, one of the things that you like to work with is death journaling.
Yes.
Tell my listeners what death journaling is and the benefits that it has.
So my own death journal, I'm looking at it right now in my home office, and it's sitting on my bookshelf, which is actually a casket that's being used as a bookshelf right now. So a true memento mori piece.
Oh, wow.
And I have been creating my death journal for a number of years. I think I was inspired to start working on it after I finished my hospice volunteer training, I believe. I think that after that, it really brought up a lot that I hadn't yet contemplated, and there was more in there. And so I needed a place for that to land. And since then, I've added so much to it. So it includes messages to my loved ones, individual and sort of at large, all the people that I love in my life. It includes what I call my core self lists in there. So my first one, I believe, was a happiness is list. And so on the top of the page, it just says happiness is ... And then I've added entries to it throughout the years. And so it's this wonderful walk down memory lane for me and for those that I love, but it also really highlights what truly has brought me joy in this life. And I figured from there, I then added a comfort is list. And with the intention of, if my family were to turn to my death journal while I was dying, let's say, for example, my death is imminent and known to be happening soon, then they might need to turn to my death journal for ideas about how to best care for me during that time. So my comfort is list really supplies them with a bunch of ideas of how to best care for me. And if not, it's again another walk down memory lane, because perhaps my death will be unexpected and more sudden. And then I also have added song lyrics, poetry, mantras, quotes in there, random reflections of the world. I have these lists of memories as well. So I just went away to lead a retreat, a travel retreat that was about death journaling. And while I was gone, I wanted them to have something that represented me. So I left a vase with little cardstock cards, and each one had a memory for each night that I was gone. So a time that I truly treasure that I got to share with my family, and they could take one out each night and read it. And I will then glue those into my death journal. And I've done that in the past as well. So it's this compilation of who I am, what I have found to be important in my own life, how I have grown, how I have struggled, a lot of reflections, reminiscing, life stories. It's this huge compilation. It's me on a page. It's my voice. It's my scribbles. It's my writing. It's my hopes for them, my encouragement for their time of grief as well, because I know that one thing that I'm sure of is, if anything is going to keep me anchored to this lifetime, to this body, to this world, it will be my dearest beloveds. And knowing that I have created this resource for them that they can lean on during their greatest time of need, when they're really missing me in my absence, they can still find me there on the page and connect with me in this way, I think will provide me with a little more courage as I face the end of my life, and reassurance that they will have this even after I'm gone. So I then took that death journal and poured all of those ideas plus other ideas into my newest publication, so that people can really think about in their own life, how can I create this type of remembrance gift, this legacy project to leave behind to loved ones. And also, because not everyone is interested in legacy work, it also stands alone as a great way to just reflect on your life and reminisce and process and think about what has gone potentially unhealed. What are some wounds that I need to revisit? How can I lift burdens for myself in the time that I have, that I'm alive and well? And what can I work toward in terms of my goals that reflect my values in life?
Francesca, do you sit down, or have you ever sat down with those who are closest to you and said, I want to show you this part of my death journal so that when the time comes, if it's needed, you'll know what I want? Have you ever shown it to them?
I have not shown them my actual death journal, except for my mom. She asked if she could have special access to it. And I said, yes, definitely. So we looked at it together. And the reason that I haven't is because I really do want to save it for that time as something special. But I have had the conversations with my family. And so nothing in there will be surprising to them. Nothing will be new news. There's no secrets or anything in there. it will all feel very familiar, hopefully in a comforting way. And some of the activities actually within my death journal, I have completed with my loved ones. So while writing the new book, I came up with some fresh ideas and I wanted to try them out before encouraging other people to try them out, because I think that that's, best practice. And so I asked my 2 teenagers if they would attempt a new prompt with me. And they said, sure. So we sat at the table and it was about beliefs. So I gave us each a note card. And on the top of the note card, I wrote, I believe in, and then I believe that. And I said, let's all take a couple of minutes in silence to fill out the note card. And whatever comes to mind, it can be quite serious. You can be reverent about this. It could be very lighthearted. It could make you laugh. Whatever it is, everything is invited and included here. And so we took some time to write and brainstorm, and then we took time to share. And it really was incredible. These people, these humans that I have loved since before they took their first breath, to complete this type of activity together was incredibly meaningful. And I feel like I got to know them on a deeper level, and they made me laugh. They come up with funny things like, I believe in having cheese at every meal, or something silly like that. And then they also came up with such hopeful statements that I think like the world actually might be okay in their hands in the generations to come. And so those are now in my death journal as well. So some of it they have seen from time to time, or they have heard, but it's all kind of together and prepped for them in this one place, and they know where to find it and they know when to come find it.
I love that. It's not about legal documentation. It's not about a directive to your physicians. This is something very personal. Are your kids receptive to having all these conversations with you about death and dying?
They are, and I try not to be pushy about it. I try to be mindful of their pacing and where they're at in their life, just as I am with any clients that I'm supporting, and with myself and my own mortality awareness journey. So we certainly don't talk about death all the time, but my kids, probably more than the average kids, know a lot about birth and a lot about death based on my work. And I see that having effects, like sometimes it's really heavy for them. And they've had moments when they've been younger that the reality of that inevitability hits them. And I can't rescue them from those emotions, that heartbreak that they feel. I can give them a warm embrace and a listening ear, and I can kind of sit back in wonderment alongside them through that. But I've also seen how it can really facilitate their ability to manage change and loss in their own lives in a healthy way and in a more prepared way. So they've been included and involved in our own family losses, and they ask questions, we have conversations, we try to give them a frame of reference, we try to make sure that whatever we can supply to them that would be useful, because kids, it's a blank slate, right? They don't know, so they use their imaginations, and sometimes that works quite well, and sometimes that can actually be a detriment to them because they're imagining things that are maybe harder than they're going to be.
Right.
And always making sure that they feel like they're directing their own choices, so they're not forced into situations that feel too uncomfortable for them. For example, when my grandfather died about a decade ago, there was a lot of talk about, do you bring your kids? Do you not? Do you leave them home? And I think a lot of adults try to spare children the intensity of an experience. But really what that ends up doing for a lot of kids is making them feel very isolated and alone in something that feels confusing to them. So I wanted to make sure that they had access to conversations. And I'm very honest when I say I don't have all the answers. And as an adult, I'm still wondering a lot of these questions that you're asking me, and we can wonder about them together. And sometimes we can use magical thinking, and we can say what I would hope with all my heart is true about this or not. But they were able to come to my grandfather's services, and we used a ritual that we often rely on as a family called our blessing stone ritual, so that they could fill up a gift and leave it in their great-grandfather's hands with their blessings for him in his journey, and a way to show gratitude and find a little bit of closure in that kind of relationship. And I also see it coming up in other ways. Like, for example, my daughter is not great about where she stores her cash. So she makes money babysitting. And I was nagging at her at one point. I'm like, I see these like piles of money all over the place. She's like, I know, but my really good friend knows where all of my stashes are. And I have told her that when I die, she is able to come and collect that money, and it will be for her. So she's beginning in her young teenage years to think about her own planning and her own wishes. And I said, okay, thank you for telling me that. It's great to know, because otherwise your friend would have just shown up and is like rummaging through your room, and I'm not sure what's going on.
Taking all your money. Oh my gosh.
So it reverberates, and sometimes we're just planting seeds, and then sometimes I see them blossoming.
I wonder sometimes if we don't, I don't want to say put kids in those situations, but allow children to be exposed to death and dying, those conversations and those events, because we ourselves don't cope with it very well, or we really don't know how to explain it comfortably to someone else.
Absolutely.
When we don't cope with it that well to begin with on our own, it's so much harder to have to figure out how to explain it to a child. I'm not really comfortable with this, so we just don't talk about it. And I'm not going to tell you I'm not comfortable with it. That's so much easier than standing in front of Granddad's casket and saying, I don't like the way this looks, or this isn't who he is to me, and this is a part of a funeral that I dislike, to be able to sort of suss that out in ourselves and then explain it to a child. Do you think we just avoid it because it's more comfortable?
Absolutely. And then I think it catches up with us. And I do quite a bit of training and workshops, and I've created courses and programs for doulas. And I hear it all the time from adults who say, I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to my aunt or my grandfather or my pet. And I never knew what actually really happened. And I was kept off to the side. And it's really painful, even as adults. I mean, I just led this beautiful retreat, and there were people there, adults in their, third and fourth act of life, who say, I have actually never felt like I've gotten permission to grieve some of these early losses. And it's never too late, but it's also, never too early to start having these conversations and allowing space in our culture, in our families, in our conversations, to be able to hold this, the weight of it, the mystery of it, and these conversations that aren't easy, yet are so necessary. They're really vital.
Yeah. I think we just perpetuate the discomfort. We teach it from generation to generation. I'm not comfortable with this, so this is what I'm going to model to you, and this is what I'm going to teach you to do yourself. This is how you cope with it. You avoid it and you don't talk about it. Yeah, I think we do that.
In a world where compassion and community are needed more than ever, the International Doula Life Movement presents the Tree of Life Conference. Join IDLM November 1st through the 4th in San Antonio, Texas, for an extraordinary experience in end-of-life care. The Tree of Life Conference is not just an event, it's a movement towards making a positive impact. Attendees will hear from expert speakers, including award-winning end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes, Lisa Paul of the Death Deck, Brenda Kazire and Nancy Hireman of Odonata Care, and end-of-life advocate Helen Bauer, host of the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Tree of Life Conference is more than just workshops and seminars. It's an opportunity to connect, learn, and renew your commitment to compassionate care. This event is made possible by the team at International Doula Life Movement, who believes in the power of empathy, education, and making a difference in the world. Don't miss out on this transformative experience. Join IDLM at the Tree of Life Conference in San Antonio, Texas from November 1st through the 4th. Visit internationaldoulalifemovement.com for more details and secure your spot today. When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire, with over 40 years of combined hospice experience. The Care Plan is your trusted companion, a wealth of knowledge from clinicians who understand the unique challenges of hospice care. Nancy and Brenda provide practical insights in their book, along with a library of guided videos that offer caregiving tips and techniques to make caregiving easier and simpler. The Care Plan isn't just a book. It's a source of strength for those who navigate the challenges of caregiving, ensuring that every moment is embraced with compassion and care. The goal of Oda Not a Care is to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Don't forget that the Care Plan is also available in Spanish. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
You do some very deep work personally. You're doing your own death journal, which I think is an amazing thing. How long have you been doing your death journal?
It has been, I think, about 6 years or so that I've been working on it. And I still have some empty pages, and I hope that I will have the time to fill it up. And who knows, from there, I might have a second scrapbook that I begin. And yeah, it's been a wonderful process for me and a practice for me.
Do you think you'll ever get to the point where you say it's finished? It's a completed work by itself?
Maybe this first edition, but I don't believe I'll ever reach the point where I just feel so kind of at peace and steady in my own ability to accept my own mortality. Mostly because life continues to provide opportunities to sort of shake that, and facing my own losses, which are close to me, definitely affects my own perception of mortality. And then seeing how I'm responding and reacting to loss that feels very personal, then I think about my loved ones and how they will respond. So I think it will always be evolving.
The reason I bring that up is because we have a tendency in end-of-life care in the industry, the hospice industry, to say, okay, you do your advanced care plan and then you're done, right? You've got a directive to physicians, you've got a healthcare proxy, and maybe you have a do not resuscitate, depending on whether you have a terminal illness or not. But that's really not a full and robust, a complete advanced care plan. It involves things like, what do you think quality of life is like? Where do you want to die? All these different things. And I think those almost constant iterations come to us through life experience and personal growth and being exposed to different events. I remember going to a funeral, I think it was last year, for a relative, and getting in the car, and I told my husband, I have just realized I don't ever want to be embalmed, and I don't want to be buried, and I don't want to be cremated. I just watched that happen, and the impact of it was very different for me at the age and stage I'm in now, and now I don't want any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that.
Right.
Yeah.
It may not have even crossed your mind.
Right. So I think those iterations and those repeated conversations, I think those are very important. So I want to talk to you about your doula work, because it's very rich and very meaningful. It takes a lot of empathy, and there are so many gifts that come with it. But there are also struggles that we experience because there's a lot of wear and tear that comes from working in a care profession. And an end-of-life doula, a death doula, is absolutely a care professional. What do you find the most meaningful? Where do you get the most meaning when it comes to your doula work?
Whether it's birth or death or grief, because I've also held the role of being a story listening doula for people in grief, it feels like such an incredible honor to be entrusted, to be allowed in. And for me, it helps me remember what is actually real in life and what really matters to me in ways that no other job I've ever held can even come close to. And so that enables me to then keep my priorities in check and live in the ways that feel like they're in alignment with who I am and how I want to be known by those that I really care about. So it's really, it can be very challenging. I think that some of us in this field, we tend to doubt our enoughness. And I talk about this in the book and I talk about this in workshops sometimes because people really doubt that, am I trained enough? Am I ready enough? Am I healed enough? Am I strong enough? And we doubt that. And in my own mind, what I've had to do is rework that so that it's evidence that my work matters very deeply to me. That is a sign of my reverence for what I'm doing. And I also have to pause and remind myself that no matter what, if I'm going in for just what I assume will be an average visit with my client, or if I'm going in to potentially sit vigil with somebody, I do vigil sitting as a hospice volunteer as well. I don't know exactly what I will be called to do. I don't exactly know in advance what sort of offerings will be beneficial in that moment at that time for that person. And so I really have to enter in with a lot of courage and a lot of openness to be able to see the experience unfold in its most organic and natural way without me interfering there. So we really talk about holding a flexible agenda. We might have some ideas in mind, or we may have made an agreement with somebody and have an understanding about what they are thinking, what they're expecting of us, but it really does have to shift. And I call myself a chameleon caregiver because of that. I have to step forward or step back sometimes, but I'm trying to blend into the background as much as possible, trying to not make it about me and what I'm doing in that moment or how I'm being, how I'm presenting, the presence that I'm taking. And it's really about the people that I'm caring for. And they're in the limelight, they're in the forefront and they're always the focus. So it's just been an incredible way of growing as a person, of keeping in touch with my own humanity, keeping my heart open, but keeping steady in my ability to stay sustained in terms of my energy. Like you mentioned about empathy, I very mindfully practice from a place of compassion. And it's been vital for me as a doula to differentiate between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And I feel like sympathy and empathy are stepping stones toward compassion. And in my mind, I think about sympathy as being, I feel a sense of pity. I feel sad for someone. I feel bad for someone. And that can actually be very heavy to take on, that kind of feeling. And then for empathy, I visualize that as shifting into, I am trying to feel how this feels for you. I'm trying to imagine myself in your shoes. Or I'm trying to remember a time in my own life that I have experienced something similar. And from there, I'm trying to create connection. But it's really adjusting how I'm feeling internally. And that can be quite draining. And we actually can't ever truly match where somebody else is because it's always fluid and changing. And it's very personal. So for me, compassion is taking one more step and always aspiring to practice from a place of, I honor how this feels for you. And I'm going to learn directly from you how this feels for you. So I'm not worrying about how I'm feeling, how I would feel, how I have felt. I'm purely being attentive to the experience of the person in front of me, and they're able to share and inform me about what it is and how it is and how they're feeling as a result of that. And then from there, what they might need in terms of support and what they're needing from me in those moments. That asks me to cultivate a lot of trust in the process of being human, being mortal, facing hard things and navigating through them. And it asks me to cultivate a lot of trust in each person and in their inherent wisdom and their strength to see themselves through, especially when they're doubting it themselves. And when I can tune into that, then I can help create the conditions around them where they feel like somebody's actually believing in them. Somebody is actually holding that faith in their ability to be mortal, to be vulnerable, to ask questions, and to lean into any suffering that they might be feeling, while I'm not taking on the role of rescuing them or trying to save them. I really do trust them with the fullness of their experience, of their journey. And in that way, it generally feels empowering to whoever I'm serving, and it allows me to remain energized and really passionate about my work. Now, sometimes I am not as on it as I could be, and I feel that, and I need to attend more to my own process and my own needs and take good care of myself, provide some self-nurturance. And other times I feel like I am super steady and just in awe, truly, most of the time, of what I get to do in my life and what I get to call my work.
So something you said about moving from sympathy to empathy to compassion really resonates with me, because I think with empathy, what we are truly doing is finding the relatedness. How do I relate to this situation? It's not me, right? So I don't own it. But how does it relate to me? And I think in its simplest form is this is another human being dying, and I will have my own version of this and have the end of my own life. So if we can't relate to anything else, despite how open-minded and open-hearted we are, if we can't relate to anything else about someone else and who they are, we can relate to the fact that we are human with a finite endpoint and they are a human with a finite endpoint. And that's where you get to the compassion. Yeah, I don't have to be exactly who you are, but I can understand that at some point I will own the same experience that you are having.
Yeah.
And I can sit with you and watch this, and I won't say without fear, but with courage, because I think it takes a lot of courage for any end-of-life worker, for a doula to sit vigil and watch someone move through this without blinking. I think it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Absolutely. And the Latin roots of compassion is suffering together. In my mind, I think about, like you were saying, that we hold at the same time that we're creating all this space for the other person's interpretation of what's happening. We also hold this acknowledgement of the universals. You know, I am also mortal. I am also human. I also suffer. I also face loss. I will also be at the end of my time at some point here. So we're holding both. And it takes mindfulness, it takes intention, and it does take effort. But if not, then I see how people can begin to spiral into either they're closing themselves off and they're putting up a wall, and they're no longer in touch with their own humanity and their heart and that ability to connect with people, or they're just burning out. They're feeling so fatigued and exhausted by it, and they can't sustain their energy anymore in their work. So it's really important, I think, that we all develop practices in our own ways and whatever works well for us in terms of the language we use, the philosophies, the approaches, and then also the action that we take to make sure that we are taking good care of ourselves, and when we're offering so much as natural nurturers.
Yeah. And I think there's I call it wear and tear, but there is natural consequence that comes from working in this field. And it is, as we care for our patients and their families' mind, body, and spirit, it is a toll on us, mind, body, and spirit. And anybody who says, well, that's not physical work, try sitting vigil or being a hands-on caregiver, depending on what your role as a doula or an end-of-life worker is. Mind, body, spirit are impacted. Absolutely. And you can't impact one without impacting the other two. So I think it's definitely some complicated work, but incredibly valuable and very rewarding if we can tap into it. I love the work that end-of-life doulas do. There's so much value. So I want to talk about how people think about doulas, what people know about doulas, because it's sort of a new role when it comes to end of life. People ask me, what is a death doula? And I use the explanation, a doula is like a midwife. You have birth doulas, and that's like a midwife, and people know that term. But man, you say a death doula, a lot of people don't have any idea what that is. They picture somebody jumping around shaking a tambourine, with smoke, sage smoke, and chicken bones. They don't know what that means. So what is the craziest thing, the craziest misconception you've ever heard about the work that you do as a death doula?
I mean, some of what you just said definitely hits it. I think that for me, coming from the birth world, I'm actually hesitant to talk about midwives only because they are medical care providers. And so I do not associate myself with that. There are some death care workers who do call themselves midwives, and they talk about, the support, the emotional support that they provide to people, mind, body, and spirit coming out of this world. I wouldn't use the term midwife just out of my deep respect for their level of training and the different offerings that they have at the beginning of life. But I do find that more and more people are familiar with birth doulas and that work. And then I can kind of transition them to think about how it is actually pretty similar at the end of life. And that is a jump for people, because when they think about birth, they think about those first moments when the new family is celebrating this new baby, this new life, this brand new human in the world. And it's so special and amazing. And yes, that is an unparalleled visual. And I've been witness to that, and it is incredibly moving. But as a doula, my work is leading up to that. It's the hours, it's the days leading up to that. It's the times where people are doubting themselves, where they feel like that's it, they've had enough, they can't do anything more. It's the moments when they have these hopes and wishes for their birth and things go awry, and we have to come up with a brand new plan, and we have to shift and things go sideways. It's the connection that I'm able to witness, that I see between a person and their own strength, a person and their past, a person in their present, a person in their future within relationships. It's people tapping into their own strength. It's people having suddenly and unexpectedly past traumas arise in those moments that it can feel incredibly overwhelming. It's attempting to supply what somebody might need to hear, or a certain type of gentle touch that might be reassuring to them, or ideas for how to manage their suffering that they're experiencing then. It's all of that that's really my work as a doula. And that can feel really similar going into the end of life. Sometimes it's not so acute. Sometimes it feels like it's more sort of stretched out, and it still can very much feel like a roller coaster for people. Sometimes people feel at peace and this sense of equanimity, like I'm actually okay with this. And they might have a disease process where they feel so tired of feeling ill and of side effects and of treatments that they've been enduring, that they just feel done and ready to be done. And at other points, people are clinging to any moments of life that they could possibly wrestle out of this existence. And there's struggle, and there's pain, and there's beauty, and there's connection, and there's strength, and there's exhaustion, and there's just so much of that when I can illuminate that, and then people feel like they have more of a frame of reference, then they can come to a better understanding about what it is I actually offer. But usually they're curious, so it gives me kind of a platform to be able to educate and say, sometimes as a doula, I'm hired for a one-off task. Somebody might want to update their advanced care planning documents. I can support them with that. I've taken additional training in that realm. Sometimes it's that they want to explore options that they might have available to them. So are there, for example, somebody requested my services because they wanted to know, what do they have available for natural burial, green burial options in this area? Or they want to write their own obituary and make sure that they've lifted that burden off of their loved ones. I have somebody I'm working with regularly who is not quite eligible for hospice and who wants to create an end-of-life care plan. So we meet and we talk about that. And I'm attempting to always bridge people to any additional resources beyond what I can offer that they might not be aware of, that I'm aware of in the community, because I feel like that's one of my responsibilities as a death care worker. And so making sure that they have all the options available to them and all the information that they need to make their best choices about their journey moving forward. So it can really vary. And I think often what people say is, well, if you have hospice, why would you need a doula? That's a question I get a lot. And I am also a hospice volunteer, and I really value hospice so very much. And the answer to that is, as a doula, as a private practice doula, I'm able to determine my schedule. And in coordination with my client, we can decide we're meeting 3 times this week for 3 hours each session, or we're meeting 1 time every other week. It's really up to us. It frees us up to be at the bedside more than a lot of hospice care providers are able to be. And because there's no licensure overseeing body, because we operate outside of the healthcare system, I'm not as bogged down by documenting and other types of pulls on my time that hospice care workers, palliative care workers really have to juggle alongside the direct patient care, which can feel very challenging for people because they want to be bedside. They want to be connecting. They want to be catching those stories. They want to be helping somebody create their legacy projects and remembrance gifts. But time-wise, it's really difficult to be able to give enough of that to each person when there are so many restrictions and limitations and just demands. And, the census is high at our respite house, and people have large caseloads. So that's really a main difference between a private practice doula and somebody working within the healthcare system.
I'm glad you clarified using the word midwife, because that's probably not the best way for me to describe that. I've sort of forgotten about the medical responsibilities and the medical abilities that a midwife has. So that's probably not the best explanation.
But people do use it. I just choose not to, based on my background.
No, I think that's smart, though. I think it probably adds more confusion to the role of a doula and the definition of a doula. But doula is just a new word, and people are just now figuring out how they fit into what we do in end-of-life care. And I think a lot of hospice professionals are still figuring out how to work in collaboration with an end-of-life doula. Not even necessarily having one on the team, but having one as a volunteer, or having a patient who has chosen to have a privately paid doula work with them in addition to having the hospice team. There are a lot of different ways a doula can be involved when it comes to end of life. And I think that's a good lesson for me. So I want to hear about your newest book. Tell me about your new book.
So it's the Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. It's a very interactive workbook. So it's part journal. There are a lot of reflective prompts in it. It's part death literacy guidebook. So it's really giving people a lot of information. I included quite a few stories from my own personal life in terms of my losses and grief, and also my work anecdotes with respect to confidentiality for all of my clients always. And it's an opportunity for people to develop their own plans and their own remembrance gifts that they might leave behind to their loved ones. So it's very comprehensive. It's very interactive.
Sounds great. So tell my listeners where they can find the book and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so my website is francescalynnarnoldy.com or contemplativedoula.com. It takes you to the same place. And in that website, I have all my books, descriptions of them, links to buy them. I have workshops that I'm running, whether they're virtual or in person, other events. I have my whole calendar. I have a blog on there with writing. And when people sign up for my newsletter, they can receive a bunch of goodies right off the bat. And then I try to do a newsletter about once a month. And I offer a lot of value and stories and resources within that newsletter as well. So the books are available widely. They are even part of libraries. So if people are attached to their local library, they might be part of Hoopla. It's on there. There are a number of different versions of it. There's audio, there's an ebook, but I really do think that the published paperback book works well because it has space for writing and for entries throughout. And I'm also finding that a lot of death care providers, whether they're in mental health or they're in hospice or palliative care in some way, or they're death doulas or they're death literacy educators, they're finding this to be a great tool because it's so full of ideas for activities and exercises that they can lead their clients through either one-on-one or groups of people. I have somebody who's leading a group of hospice volunteers through a number of the activities in the book. And so in that way, you're allowing people to reflect on their own mortality and then providing them with tools that they can use for direct care that they're offering.
Yeah, so they can use them with the patients. Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. I'll have links to everything so they can get a hold of your resources, buy your book. There are a ton of wonderful, valuable resources that you're offering.
Thank you.
To close, Francesca, I want to ask you if you will share something from your advanced care plan that may be a little bit unusual or unique.
So what might be unique to my advanced care planning that not a lot of people would include is contingency plans. So I have my plan A, which is my most ideal scenario. It's what I would really hope would happen. And I'm referring to my aftercare, so disposition specifically. And then if that is too difficult, if it's too complex, if it's too much for my family to take on, then I have a plan B. And that is entirely acceptable to me. And there would be no guilt involved if they had to go for plan B. And then beyond that, I have a couple of scenarios that are really less than desirable and that I would hope to avoid if at all possible. So with that, I hope that I'm able to give them enough information without it being so strict and restrictive that it's going to add to any suffering that they might already be feeling, emotionally in the midst of mourning. I just know after supporting people through and myself enduring losses that during that time after, it can be very overwhelming. You can have brain fog. It can be hard to get anything accomplished. So I don't want to be so picky and so clingy to a particular plan that they will feel like they have failed me if they're not able to actualize it.
Oh, I like that. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that was part of their advanced care planning. That's really good. We talk about an advanced care plan being something that sort of eases the burden of decision making for those who are left, your decision makers or your immediate family. But to have those contingency plans that say, okay, if this is really too much, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, here's another plan. Here's another option that I'm still okay with. Very nice. That's a very thoughtful piece of an advanced care plan. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Francesca, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. What a great conversation.
If you're interested in finding Francesca's work, connecting with her classes and her books, she's got many, you can find her at francescalynarnoldy.com. Remember, she's got her picture book, The Map of Memory Lane. She's got the Death Journal. She has Cultivating the Doula Heart, Essentials of Compassionate Care, and then also her newest book, The Death Doula's Guide to Living Fully and Dying Prepared. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.